Thanks, Martin, for that introduction. And thank you, AIAS board. I'm glad I got that out. It's no small amount of irony that I'm standing here, considering I started my experience in the game industry with, well, officially started with Game Developer Magazine, but spent a chunk of it running the Game Developers Conference. Oh, thank you. I didn't think I would ever be on a D.I.C.E. stage, so I really appreciate this. It's great to be here. Let me click through a little bit. So, after GDC, I did business development for Electronic Arts, signing third-party game development deals, such as Clay's Shank, Clay Entertainment. I did a few years with a mobile game company called Funzio. We made mid-core games for kind of a broader audience. And after the acquisition by D.I.C.E, it gave me some resources to start my own game company. And it was in that context that I joined Google, because I developed a certain affinity for game developers. I'd been publishing at EA, but I never really knew, never really had a sense of what it was that I was asking game developers to do until I went to the development side. So having made that jump, I'm now looking at how to help game developers, how to support them in a strategic fashion. So the practice that I'm involved with at Google Play is to manage outreach, manage support for strategic games on the store. And so that involves managing people, but also working with key segments as we see them. And one of them is the AAA games market. Now, beyond just featuring games, it's about helping be successful in the long term. Because one of the things I noticed when I was out there as a developer was that featuring once, it's great, but there needs to be sustained support. There needs to be ways to help partners if we identify them as being important to the store. So we're working in that area, but we're also working in emerging areas as well. For example, there's been a lot of talk about Living Room in this conference, which is great. I was at the GamesBeat Summit earlier this year, and I think I was the only person speaking about Living Room at that show. It was entirely about VR otherwise, so it's very refreshing to hear that. So in addition to working directly with the platform, my team also manages and curates the games portfolio for that device. So let's talk a little bit about the overall market. There have been some versions of this discussion already, and I raised this is some research from DigiCapital earlier this year. I raised this to kind of illustrate the difference between the straight console software market and mobile as well. You see a growth from today to 2018, which is really telling. You see this reflected in press and analyst reports. And some of this may seem very provocative. I understand I'm speaking to an audience that has still a lot of its revenue and success coming from the console market. What I'd like to do is instead draw your attention to the third article here. It speaks to the success that Square Enix has been enjoying in mobile. So why Square Enix? I've been working very closely with our international teams, specifically our Japanese team, to kind of understand how is this success coming about. And when I speak about success, I mean Square Enix was releasing ports of their successful Final Fantasy series in 2012. And then our team started working with them and trying to explain and showcase and work with them to see how they could move forward. The result of that is something that is sometimes hard to see, because at the top of the charts, it's your typical mobile-first developers. So in Japan, you'll see a certain couple of publishers that you would recognize. But if you keep going down that list, you'll see Square Enix. You'll see Bandai Namco. You'll see Sega. You'll see a lot of the names that are familiar to a AAA console audience. So a lot of what we're doing is migrating a lot of those learnings over and working very closely with AAA partners today. So you'll see this across app ecosystems as well. So in addition to Apple, Amazon, Google Play is extremely excited and interested in supporting this category. Now, exactly what does Google Play look like today? We have 1 billion devices activated in the past year. Google Play is on 1 billion devices out there. 3 out of 4 smartphones in the world are Android devices. 3 out of 4 of those devices are playing games. And by the last time that we announced such a number, we've given out $7 billion to app and game developers. The previous year, it was $5 billion, so you can somewhat extrapolate a curve from where that's going. Also, you can see a little foreshadowing here by the mention of World of Tanks Blitz, and Madden as well. So here you see a couple of examples of how we're putting the thumb on the scale for projects that we think are meaningful to the future of the store and for what's meaningful to consumers. So in taking a longer view, a strategic view of what the store means, one thing that we did was we took a hard look at the way our content ratings are described, or were described at that time. They were not entirely helpful. They were not entirely descriptive and understandable by consumers. So what we did was we worked very closely with the IARC team to understand how do consumers and parents evaluate content. We saw that there was much more interest in using content ratings that people already knew and understood around the world. So the adoption of IARC ended up providing a significant lift in terms of being able to express what the content of a product is when you have very little real estate to work with. And so seeing an E for everyone in the ESRB way of looking at things, or the PEGI ratings, this was incredibly empowering to the developers that are already on the platform, but for AAA and console-based developers, it looked like a place that seemed familiar. And in many ways, that's perhaps one of the first elements in which we're trying to make Google Play a home for games, both talking to game publishers and developers, but also gamers themselves. So another element of that is pre-registration. So pre-registration has, of course, existed in console and PC for a very long time, but until very recently, it has not existed in mobile. This is something that Google Play is doing for the first time. What you see here is Disney Infinity Toy Box 3.0, and the opportunity is to pre-register. In version 1 here, what that actually means is that it sends to the consumer a pop-up, a push notification when that game is actually live on the store. It's the beginning of introducing a coming soon experience to the store, which is proving in our early alpha test. So this is actually live on the store right now. But a couple of games have already gone through this, where they had a pre-registration, and 2 weeks later, they launched on the store. And so far, all of those cases have resulted in phenomenal installs on launch. So let's just say it's exceeding expectations, both for us and for the partners involved. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that Google is a very futuristic type of company. It's a company that likes to imagine what the future is going to be like. It's a company that attracts a lot of people that are interested in doing moonshots and just really fun, cool stuff. So here, I found this wonderful piece of art that showed people on jetpacks. And one of the reasons that I have this slide is that a couple of years ago, before I actually joined Google, but one of my colleagues loves telling the story, that every year Google provides a gift to its employees. And so almost as a prank, there was an option to tick for a jetpack, but it would arrive in 2020. So whether or not that's actually going to happen, I'm not entirely sure, but enough people signed up for it that it's become kind of apocryphal inside the company. But on a more realistic level, relevant to this audience, one of the moonshots that I find particularly interesting is the collaboration between Google Fiber and Shinra Technologies. And that is we're talking about streaming of video games. This is a very interesting pilot that's happening right now in Kansas City, where people are able to access some early Shinra games over Google Fiber. So there's always something very interesting going on at the company. Now, not only are we looking at high-level partnerships like that, but we're also looking at ways in which we can work with individual game developers and partners. Certainly, there's been a lot of talk about VR, and we're certainly there to support it as well. Google is doing so with Cardboard. We've distributed 1 million of these devices to the market right now. It's extremely inexpensive, in most cases free. There's a lot of interest among consumers right now. And you can see that the way that Google Play, the store, the marketplace that everyone is familiar with and comfortable with, they have their credit card information in there, they have their friends in there. Through Google Play, the way that we kind of meet that interest is by putting together a collection. So the Discovery Challenge is something that we're actively, constantly working with. And so by putting a featured cardboard apps collection up front, it gives people a way to access and see what's going on. And to the point earlier, perhaps it's not games, but certainly there's a lot of apps that are capturing people's attention. Like the Paul McCartney concert was one of the best performing apps in this collection. But to bring it closer to some of the, to some of the engagement systems that are familiar to AAA game developers, haptics, force feedback. If you have this in your game, then this is something that we want to make sure that we highlight as well. Any little thing that helps draw people into your experience, makes them feel like they're actually there, is something that we want to support with. And so we also did a collection around haptics. Now, it's not just about the things that Google is doing, okay? It's also about the trends that we're observing. So brands, it's kind of an obvious thing to state that brands are kind of a key trend moving games today. However, the point that I want to make here about, and this is just kind of some research from App Annie stacking the popularity of certain titles. The point here is that brands are transcendent. They help people understand what it is that they're getting into. If they're already familiar with a brand, they're looking for that type of content. It's something that gets you to a broader audience, both in terms of the people in a family, but also geographies that you may not be reaching today. And I want to kind of draw attention to this collection that we did around May the 4th. So what's interesting here is that it combines games and movie content. So since Google Play is a store that has multiple verticals, we're able to put together something that includes games, movies, books, TV, music. And the result of that is that we show that each of them does better when they're in this type of collection than if they were in a collection of like products. So if it was just a games collection, they would do a certain amount of success. But putting it together with other products that are of the same brand, they each get a greater lift than we otherwise would have seen. So this is something that is incredibly interesting to track, especially from the point of view of how do we capture a broader audience. Now, looking at the store itself, looking at Google Play, looking at what it is that we intend to put some featuring support behind, what is it that we're going to help bring to the market, one of the things that's interesting is bringing back classic titles. These are games that people have grown up with, that they love, they adore. Perhaps the original versions would not fare as well. So one of the things that we're tracking is the rise of these kind of HD remixes, because they put that classic game back in your pocket. Even if it's no longer really playable on other devices, it's something you can access today. Carry around with you the catalog of great games that you love. Moving forward a little bit, there are the genres that we grew up with that are still here. So one of the things that we're conscious of, that we hear a lot when we attend shows and read in VentureBeat and such places, is that mobile is saturated. Well, we would beg to differ on that. Certainly, it would be challenging to enter the market with a match 3 game because there's a very strong incumbent there. Certainly, there would be complexities in doing the same thing with a city builder PvP game. However, there are relatively open genres, or had been, until other companies started realizing them. So the first one on the left here is Kabam's Marvel Contest of Champions. And this is a fighter. This is a classic fighter, a genre that was originated in the arcades and popularized on consoles. This is now one of the strongest games in app ecosystems today. The next one over here is Summoner's War. And this is a 3D turn-based RPG, which is, of course, inherent to console gaming. And yet, it's a not conventional AAA developer that is bringing it to market. I mean, you guys could be making these games. Now, I realize one of you did make one of these games, but let's accept Aaron from the statement at the moment. Also, we're seeing AAA brands come to the store in a purpose-built way. So Fallout Shelter has been a topic of discussion for a lot of folks. And the thing that I want to kind of point out here is that it's not Fallout per se. It is actually a purpose-built mobile game. It feels like a mobile game, but it is engrossing for core players because it brings back a brand authentically that they identify with and love. And the same with Star Wars Commander. I mentioned a moment ago it'll be challenging to come to market with a city builder with PvP, unless you happen to have Star Wars in your back pocket and you're Disney. So there is that avenue, and we continue to see developers improving on these models. But taking advantage of that strong brand and adapting it to mobile in a way that fits the play sessions, the consumption pattern, the ways that people like to play these games, it works. It hangs together, and there's an opportunity there. Also, let's say we're talking about great, iconic games that are somewhat complex and derive that enjoyment from their complexity. So what you see also in this area is EA simplified SimCity, adapted it. They took the core game essentials and adapted it to what would be necessary to work well in mobile. And the same with Final Fantasy Record Keeper. It takes a lot of what is enjoyed about Final Fantasy and distills it down into a form factor that works. You'll see that it's actually locked to portrait mode. They don't have a landscape mode for that game because they've thought so clearly and concisely about what it is that it needs to be in order to be successful for people playing games while they're riding on the subway. And of course, Google Play and all app ecosystems are extremely interested in supporting the indie community. We talked a little bit earlier about PlayStation's emphasis in that area and Xbox as well. This is a great way to kind of showcase art and talent. Does Not Commute is a personal favorite of mine, although I've yet to be able to describe it accurately. Let's just say that it is a slow-speed racing game in which you're competing with your own commute. So you do a commute, you get from one area of the board to the other, and then time rewinds and you do a different person's commute, but you are competing against the original commute that you did. Okay, so the developers describe it better than I do. Just play it. It is pretty amazing. The other one up here is Adventure Capitalist. And what is interesting about this title is that it's a clicker. I mean, it's a pretty simple, basic game. But it is so authentically written and developed, you just want to keep playing it. It just captures your imagination. And it monetizes, in large part, through video ads. And you actually do want to watch those videos, which is, in and of itself, a work of art to pull that off. The other thing that is kind of engrossing about it is that since you're playing it on your phone out in the real world, you have very interesting community experiences. I was going up an escalator to see a movie, and I was playing the game, as one does, because that's the amount of time I had. And someone was coming down the other side of the escalator, and he said, "I love that game!" And it was a wonderful moment, because of course, Adventure Capitalist is awesome. And I'm not sure I would have otherwise had any way to connect with that person. Certainly was a very small moment of time. But indie games have the ability to really inspire people and cause this kind of rabid fascination. Another thing that we're tracking is deep engagement. So I spoke earlier about having short player sessions. Another thing that we are fascinated by is kind of the opposite of that. So certainly there's a play pattern that emerges for mobile phones, but also for tablets, it can expand. So Sims Free Play and Disney Infinity 3.0, which is not out yet but is coming soon, have extremely deep engagement. And the thing that is also interesting about Disney Infinity is that it is also a Toys to Life experience. So the mobile version connects to the console version in that you can actually play the toy boxes created in console on the mobile version, which allows you to have this wonderful cross-play moment. And so for us at Google Play, it's something that we absolutely want to make sure gets attention because it's different, it's engaging, it allows people to see a rich diversity of content on the store. Because if we don't, then there's really no point. If we don't, then we tend to stagnate. And it's absolutely critical to continue to surface that level of diversity. And finally, the last point I want to make about trends that we're tracking, this takes that player session length element to the opposite side. So it's critical for us to track games that so overtake people's lives that they become absolutely devoted to them. The other thing that's interesting about these titles, the ones that we've got up here, Hearthstone and Vainglory, is that certainly it's important and critical and healthy to be tracking a lot of the metrics that the mobile industry has been talking about for a while. Michael Denny recited them all in the beginning of his keynote. One of the most important metrics that these guys track, in working closely with them, is views. What does views mean? Well, it's spectating. As Greg was just saying, these guys care as much about their views as they do about anything else. Views on YouTube Gaming, on Twitch, on Mobcrush. That's what drives these guys. That's what they have deduced is the reason that they're getting the installs that they get. So in terms of moving away from a user acquisition-based environment, where there appears to be an arms race of making sure you're able to play this kind of vicious user acquisition game, instead, what if your game is so engrossing and engaging that everybody wants to watch it being played? That is a pretty phenomenal change, and it's something that we're actively supporting. Of course, there's an esports potential, but in order to get there, there needs to be a critical mass of great games that are worthy of devotion. So I want to switch gears briefly and talk about where app ecosystems are going. So we've heard a lot of discussion about Apple TV and Fire TV. There's also Android TV, which is a platform between devices. But what exactly is the market opportunity? It's an expanding market, to be sure. This is a piece of research from Strategy Analytics that shows that by 2018, there'll be 2 billion connected devices, living room connected devices, by that time. Now, it also shows that there are 6 categories, and there are anywhere between 4 to 6 leaders in each of those categories. So for a developer, the question is, wait, do I need to support 30 or so different devices in order to try to be successful in this market? For some of the early participants like Netflix, yes, that does make sense because their business is based on it. However, the approach that Google is taking is to provide a platform that connects them all together. This is a snapshot of the UI, and in the foreground is our Nexus player, which we introduced to the market in November of last year. Now, if it were just that device, then I think it would be on par with a lot of the other media devices that are out there. A media device that is connected to its existing app ecosystem is a powerful thing. You have all of the players, you have all of the credit cards, you have all that community ready to transfer over. However, Android TV is part of a broader ecosystem. It includes these various device categories. So smart TVs, for example, for the Sony line of 2015 smart TVs onward are all running Android TV. And while it's true that not everyone replaces their TV every year, there's an ample opportunity to get an over-the-top box that costs $100 or so. And for a lot of people that are trying to cut the cord, that are no longer seeing the value of cable, that's an opportunity. For those people that still see the value of cable, there are pay TV set-top boxes. So the box that you get from your cable company, that also runs Android TV. So these are the 3 categories that it's deployed in. Now, this is kind of generally Google's approach to provide a platform for OEM partners to be successful in, as well as game developers and app developers. So what does this actually look like? Here's a snapshot of the UI. On the left, you see the categorization, and on the right, you see pretty familiar rail-based discovery systems for the store. Now, the approach we took at the beginning was pure curation. So at this point, there are over 125 games that are manually curated and featured on the store. However, you can also browse every other game on the store as well. So we've opened it up for every developer to participate. And we've erred on the side of selecting games that can scale well to the living room. So when we're talking about mobile and tablet, in many cases for AAA game developers, we're asking you to adapt. We're asking you to adjust your input system, adjust the gameplay. For this, you guys have a natural advantage. And we've been working very closely with indies again. So, there's a theme of talking about goats at this conference, so I'm going to fit into that theme. Goat Simulator is this kind of quirky, bizarre game that was very successful on Steam. Whispering Willows is this beautiful, ethereal game that you guys just have to play. Also critically acclaimed, also on Steam. This gives you a sense of the range. It also gives you a sense of the business models that work in the living room. So these guys are both charging exactly what they did for Steam in the living room. Also, we see partners that have managed to function on a cross-platform basis as well, like basically everything Telltale does. For example, Game of Thrones is the same game, whether it's phone, tablet, Android TV, console, what have you. And Crossy Road is kind of a great example of a game that was popular on phones, and admittedly, again, based on a genre that you guys created, and someone else has come in and made a success of it. But this is something that we worked very hard on to kind of make sure worked well on the TV, so that we could help create an iconic example of this. Modern big brands in games. Now, we see, again, the resurgence of some of these classic games and some new indies that are absolutely willing to bring their games over. And you also have cases in which developers of mobile games, like this game, Skyforce 2014, a great shoot-'em-up, designed exclusively in portrait, and by coming to Android TV, they went horizontal, they went landscape, they added multiplayer, they added controller input, they adjusted the HUD to make it fit for the new play experience, for the lean-back experience. This took them a month of work. But you guys have a natural advantage. You already have controller input. You've already planned and designed for the lean-back experience. So you wouldn't have to do this much work. It's available to you now. In terms of products, Razer had announced the Forge TV at CES and won the best product, won the People's Choice Award, so best gadget as determined by, I think it was Engadget. The interesting thing to note here is that they recently announced that they acquired Ouya, more precisely the assets of Ouya. So look forward to very interesting things coming from them. This is a snapshot of the Sony TV. It shows you the UI, and it shows you how much this actually overtakes the whole experience on the television. So you turn it on, and you're in the Android TV UI. The inputs are actually a rail that are further down on there. This is available in stores today. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the Nvidia Shield Android TV. This is a device that has an incredibly powerful processor, and the high-end version of it has a 500 gig hard drive. So it's designed for play. It comes with this gamepad controller, and Nvidia has been curating their own published titles for this device. So you have games like Doom 3, Crysis 3 is coming, Borderlands pre-sequel is coming. It's got the horsepower to handle a lot of the games that you guys make. It's also kind of foreshadowing of the elasticity of what this platform can be. A lot of you guys have 2 to 3 year development cycles. So imagine something like this being further deployed. In terms of input, it's a remote control that ships one-to-one. Of course, TV manufacturers are leaning towards the remote control as the input system. Android TV devices pair with any Bluetooth controller, so it should, you should be reasonably well off by assuming a certain attach rate for it. But it's also helpful to make sure that you do design for remote input. So this is beach buggy racing. When you connect your remote control, all of them will actually have remote control already connected. You see this UI. And when you connect a gamepad, you see this one. So it makes sense. The the interesting additional thing with this title, Beach Buggy Racing, is that it also enables a second screen experience. So on your phone, you can control steering and brake, and also you control steering through the accelerometer, and through buttons it's accelerate and brake. And also you see a little bit of the HUD on the phone itself. Basically, the developers figured we want to have players focused on the TV and have basically glance-based information presented on the phone. Depending on the game, you would want to have more of the UI on the phone and less on the TV, but it depends entirely on the game. But I mention this because look at what that is. It's a kart racer made by Vector Unit, which is, it's two people. They call themselves 5, but it's really just 2 guys, and it has been for most of their existence. But this is a genre that you guys invented. This is a genre that you guys have available to you. And I invite you to take a closer look and see what we can do together. Thank you.